Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket World Cup Daily Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Scene, who we've partnered with to deliver all our podcasts and videos for the end of the 2023 World Cup. Starting soon on wisden.com, Scene will be powering our new interactive videos, allowing you to easily skip to certain segments and find relevant articles, offers and opportunities by simply clicking directly within the video. Australia are world champions. Never in doubt. They win the Men's World Cup for a sixth time after a frantic final at the Modi Stadium goes their way. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Phil Walker, Joe Harman, and Mark Butcher. Butch, not far off the perfect Australia performance, a stunning achievement to win a World Cup in India against this India side.
Yeah, they've climbed their Everest, haven't they? I reckon that's as tough an assignment as you're ever going to get. Winning against that Indian team, who have been utterly magnificent from the start. Winning against that sort of crowd, there were periods there when the wickets fell in the run chase, where it was utter bedlam in the ground. We're a little bit unsure of the exact number. Ravi said 120 at the end, but we think it's probably more around 98 or something. 99% of which were Indian fans. That is as good as it gets. Australia are serial winners of World Cup, serial winners of world events. They've had an incredible year, with the World Test Championship, retaining the Ashes here in England, and now this. And I think that's probably the crowning glory of the lot. It's just a staggering achievement. And they played pretty much the perfect game from the moment that Pat Cummins decided that they were going to have a bowl first. On winning the toss, there were a lot of things that would have gone into that decision, namely probably the change or the hopeful change in conditions in the second half with Dew. But you also had to make the consideration about chasing runs in that atmosphere, in that ground against that bowling attack. They decided it was worth taking the punt, and it paid off magnificently. They bowled and fielded like absolute demons. It was a stunning performance, and they are worthy world champions. That is the end of the story, I'm afraid. And for India, a massive missed opportunity. Winning 11 out of 11 was always going to be a tough ask. You'd rather have lost one earlier than the final. They've provided incredible entertainment and great skill throughout the tournament, but just wasn't enough on the day.
Joe, just an incredible year for this Australian team, who've spent most of it well away from Australia. They had that series in India, which feels like years ago, but then they had the IPL for a lot of them, World Test Championship, retaining the Ashes in England, then coming here unfancied. Phil was basically the only one who gave them a hope. For a lot of these players, Steve Smith, Pat Cummins, Josh Hazelwood.
I was waiting for Phil to bring that up, actually. I'm glad you've beaten him to it.
But for a lot of these players now, they're three-time white ball world champions. They've retained 2 Ashes series in England. Won the World Test Championship. This is not quite Ponting and Wars Australia, but for this era of Australian players, they've achieved almost everything you can achieve in the game.
Stunning achievement, and I agree with Butch. I think this is probably the best of the lot. We've talked a lot about preparation over the last 6.5 weeks doing these podcasts, in terms of India being perfectly primed for this thing that they've been building up to, that England hadn't done it properly. Well, Australia hadn't really done it properly either. Pat Cummins had captained 2 ODIs before Australia arrived in India for this tournament. We had Marnus Labuschagne seeing them home there, who wasn't in their original squad, wasn't really meant to be in their team even when he was, and finds himself being the glue in that middle order. You have one specialist spinner in your squad going for a World Cup to India. That doesn't look like good planning. As it happens, Zampa had an absolute blinder, and Maxwell did really well in that support role as well. So, and this isn't to diminish their achievement in anything. It makes it even better that actually they had so many things against them. This wasn't their number one target. Clearly, they wanted to win the Ashes in England, which they fell just short of doing. But stunning to beat that Indian side. I didn't think they stood much of a chance today, really. It just felt like India couldn't be stopped. But aside from, we'll come on to details of the game, but the catch from Travis Head to get Rohit Sharma, that feels to me like the hinge point of the whole game, really. And obviously he batted fairly well as well. Not a bad day for the guy.
Yeah, I mean, Phil, it wasn't just an amazing catch that turned the game. But also that's one of the great World Cup innings from Travis Head. 137, not out. Finding the man at deep mid wicket at the very end. But player of the match in the World Test Championship final, player of the match in the semi-final, and player of the match in the final. An extraordinary year for Travis Head.
He also made 160 balls in his first game back, having smashed his hand up, and we all assumed, firstly, that he wouldn't make the squad. Secondly, if he did, that he'd only really be involved right at the death. So it was a real punt, really, to put him into that squad. They brought Labuschagne in as cover. Labuschagne wouldn't have been in the squad if Head hadn't busted his hand. But then to come in that game halfway through the tournament, hit 60 ball 100, that changed the mood around the team. Just as they'd looked like a good side coming into it, and then he had that injury, and then South Africa steamrolled them in the build-up to the tournament, and then obviously they lose their first two. And he's such a key figure because he dictates the whole tempo of the innings. Warner's not quite the player that he once was, although you did well to pick him out, and he had a good tournament. But more often than not, it's been Head in the last 2 years that's driven that team on. He's a peculiar player, a singular player. He bats 5 in the Test team, which is the dream position to bat in Test cricket, really. And he opens in the one-day team. Only the really, really good players, the top World Cup class players, do that. And the way he plays, he's so untrammeled and he's so unbothered, right? By in the purity of his stroke making, he appears to be completely unbothered by the situation. And yet, people who know him well in the journalistic world, such as, say, Adam Collins, who knows him pretty well, he says that in the early part of his career, he was absolutely beset by self-doubt. And in the interview I did with him before the tournament, he totally acknowledges that, Joe, didn't he? Like he said, the first few years, didn't really believe in myself, didn't know what I was doing at that level. I'd got a few runs as a kid, but came out of nowhere, really, and didn't really back myself. It was only when I just got to a point where I just was able to shake the doubts out of my head and just play without consequence that he started to actually enjoy himself as a professional cricketer. And now you see that, brackets, he also made 160 in a day here at the Oval in the big Test match final, right? Extraordinary player. Gives up all 3 stumps just to poke it into the offside. He gives you 3 stumps. He plays this sort of on the edge of your seat risk cricket, and yet has become as consistent as any player in the world. He averages 60 plus over the last 2 years in 50 over cricket and whacks it 120, literally.
And it felt like
madness.
He was going to be an unfulfilled talent, and now suddenly he's done a lot by the age of 29 and could have a stunning career. I mean, he's probably Australian captain and waiting. You'd say I don't see Cummins doing that job for a hugely long time. I think he's primed to take over that role now. He could be a huge figure in Australian cricket. This isn't just going to be a one-off innings. He's already done enough to be a notable standout Australian batter and I think future captain.
I was listening to the radio actually coming in here, watched it majority on TV, but listening to TMS, and Jeff Lemon was on with Aaron Finch actually, and they were talking about how Marnus was a bit shotless. They were absorbing pressure, but the pressure was building, deepening, and Kuldeep bowled a conventional leg break, left armer obviously. So he's playing against the spin, and he sicks him 90 metres over mid-wicket, and that changed the dynamic of that period of time. From that point, it felt quite processional, right? And it was almost sort of comical, really, towards the end. Lovely that he got out at the death. No one wants to see a red inker when you've batted like that. It's absolute class.
Get the standing ovation.
To make sure you lob one up to deep mid-wicket and stroll off.
I was going to bring up that shot as well, because at Butch at 47 for 3 with the ball hooping round, with India's attack, we know what they've done all tournament. There was a period where Australia just weren't really going anywhere, and you're like, suddenly, hang on, these 190 runs where are these actually coming from? Yeah. And it was that shot of Kuldeep that sort of swung the momentum back into Australia's favour. And every opportunity that Head had over the next 30 overs to attack, he just took it.
Yeah.
What do you think makes him so good at doing that? Because he seems to be someone who has quite a simple game plan and just completely backs it.
Well, I think if you look through the whole of the innings, particularly when Jadeja and Kuldeep were on in that middle period, he basically tries to play. Marnus was propping forward, playing very sort of Test match style, and just to try and keep them out, acknowledging that if Kuldeep and Jadeja had picked up 3 wickets or something between them in their 20 overs, they would probably lose the game. But Head stays back, right? He's always looking to stay back. He'll give up his stumps given the chance with a little bit of length to try and slap it through the offside. And then the bowlers end up having to chase. They kind of got to a point where the run rate wasn't going up. It was still around just under 5s. And so they then had to try and attack to take wickets, which is when he got the chance, that every once in a while one would go up in the air a little bit and he'd just bang it over mid-wicket. What makes him such a special player overall is that he has the most incredible hand-eye coordination. I mean, that's kind of the basis of it. He has no technique to speak of, but does kind of understands kind of risk to a certain degree. Not in the way that Marnus Labuschagne understands risk, but he understands. Okay, I need the ball in a certain place to be able to hit it in the places I want to hit it. But the rest of it is based entirely around instinct and hand-eye coordination. And of course, if you're going back to what you're talking about him as a younger player, if given the lack of sort of any real sort of technical prowess as a batter, and you don't need it, if you have the hand-eye coordination that he's got, if you've got doubt in yourself, a doubt as to whether you're as to what you're doing is the right thing, then that is going to cause you problems. If you have no doubt about whether what you're doing is the right thing, then you have no problem whatsoever. You're not bothered about how you're looking. You're bothered about the method that you have, which is going to score you the most runs. And it was, he's just to do the 2 innings that he's played, obviously, over the course of this year, the World Test Championship final, it was zapping around all over the place here at the Oval. India's bowling attack on song, it decking around, flying through to the keeper. He makes 160. How? How do you make, under those conditions? So he does it there, wins them the game. And then, once they'd got off to the start that they got off to, even with the bedlam going on around them after the 3 wickets fell, you just felt like, okay, he's kind of got this under control. Unbelievably calm innings as well as, brutal.
Especially when you think how those first 8 or 9 overs of Australia's reply were ridiculously manic, completely breathless. India was so desperate to take wickets because they knew they needed to, and there was sort of a Jaffa followed by 5 wides, and there was something happening every ball. Australia playing some awful shots. Warner's was a terrible shot. Mitch Marsh looked like he was going to get out any other ball when he wasn't hitting a 6. So to actually slow it down, and Labuschagne deserves a lot of credit for this as well, to slow it down and then go again, I thought was incredibly impressive. And it won't be remembered as a classic match, I guess, because in the end Australia won comfortably.
Well, no, it was an awful match.
But I thought in terms of, I thought it was a good advert for 50 over cricket, which obviously we've talked a lot about over the last few weeks, in showing the different tempos that you can get within a game. Like that first phase felt like, a T10 or more than a T20. But then actually there were periods that felt a bit like a test match. And I think that's ODI cricket at its best. Sure, we didn't get the grandstand finish, but you can't always get that. But I thought it was a really good game, and another bit of vindication for why 50 over cricket should have a future in amongst all the rest of it.
Knockout 50 over cricket, anyway.
Yeah,
definitely.
Definitely.
Good.
Phil, you caveat.
Just finally on head. So, World Player of the Year has to be Men's Player of the Year, Man of the Match in that final out there, Man of the Match in the semi-final, Man of the Match in the final.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really argue with it.
World Player of the Year without a doubt.
Yeah. But on Labuschagne, as Phil said earlier, sort of accidentally in the squad, sort of accidentally in the side, thanks to how many injuries it had at various points in the tournament. He went about his innings very differently to how pretty much all the pundits on commentary said. They thought he was going into a shell a little bit too much, but actually it was almost quite an old school ODI chase in that it was Marnus, make sure you're there at the end, and it worked well because of what Head was doing.
Australia went to 10s for the first 4, right? And that sounds like, well, that's that doesn't mean anything in the context of the game. You knock off 40 out of the 200 in the first 4 overs, 2 down,
and you take 15 off Bumrah's first over.
Exactly, you can't. Australia were always coming out to do that. But what Travis Head did was then smart. It's kind of the thing that you would call for under the situation, which was, right, we can't afford to lose any more wickets now. And also, we're way ahead of the rate, so we can take our time to make sure that we get ourselves in. Marnus comes in and does exactly what they kept him in the side for, as you say, which was in the last 2 games over Stoinis. And after the semi-final, I said that perhaps they'd leave him out because he didn't work out particularly well for them, with him being the sort of like a guy playing Test match style cricket in the middle overs. However, Australia did their homework to the nth degree in terms of the surface. and on a surface whereby it wasn't going to be 300 plays 300, he was the right man for the job. I also saw in the build up to into the match, he and Steve Smith both spent a couple of hours each in the nets against solely left arm leg break bowlers and left arm spinners, and kind of worked out a way of being able to tick the score over without taking any risks, which is exactly what Marnus did. I mean, even though in the partnership, particularly in the early stages of it, Marnus seemed to be going absolutely nowhere at all. By the time I got off the tube, my signal disappeared out of my ears. They were going at above fives, the pair of them, against the spin through the middle. And then every time Rohit Sharma went back to the seamers to try and break a wicket, they let loose again, or Head let loose again. So it was perfect. That was why they had him in the team, and congratulations to them for sticking to their guns. But more importantly, I think congratulations to them for reading the conditions as well as they did, because they read them utterly perfectly.
Yeah, just a couple of moments of Head letting loose. He hit Shami's first ball back in the attack over his head for one bounce 4. And also I think Bumrah's first over back in the attack he went for 14 or 15 again. Yeah. So every time, and Siraj, as soon as Siraj came into attack, he bopped him over mid wicket for, India made the decision first time that Shami had taken the new ball in the tournament, which I even though you could say, okay, well, he bowls brilliantly left-handers. Australia got 2 left-handers at the top. He then went against what he would normally do, which is keep seam upright and bowled cross seam deliveries with the new ball, worried that he wasn't going to be able to control the swing. So you kind of, you've tried to be a little bit smart and attack the 2 left-handers with your gun bowler against left-handers, but he goes away from doing what he does against them naturally, which is to keep the seam up. So there were small areas of head-to-head competitions or sort of tactical decisions that were made that Australia got perfectly right and India maybe missed.
And just trying to figure out how Head is so good. Just think about it there. Because he stays quite leg side of it, he seems to have more control than other left-handers facing right arm over, because he kind of open himself up and he can target areas where in one-day cricket you don't tend to have fielders. You don't tend to have a fielder sort of straight cow, for example. You have it mid-wicket and you have obviously a long on. And so because he does give himself that sort of space, he can control the areas where he wants to hit it more than a perhaps more conventional player who will be a little bit more clogged up because they'll be covering their middle and off stumps. And so, it's quirky and idiosyncratic, but you saw it in the Headingley Test match, right? When England were bouncing him and they literally had 5 men out from backstop to a straight long on, and he could still pick his spots because he has this peculiar, almost unique way of lining it up. As a southpaw, tell me, is there anything in that, any logic at all, or is that just bullshit?
Well, no, it's just
I'm trying to figure him out.
But if you're going to do that, it's a little bit like the Graham Smith conundrum, right? Graham Smith with his sort of bottom hand wrapped right underneath the blade, and he would deny himself the pleasure of stroking the ball between point and extra cover on the front foot, because the angles of the way he held the bat and everything else sort of went against that. So Travis Head, in playing in that way, he is not trying to hit the ball back through mid-on. Right, he's not trying to hit on the front foot through mid-on. So what it does is, if he keeps nailing the ball sort of over straight mid-wicket off the back foot with a cross-batted shot, the bowler then has 2 options, really. I mean, in one-day cricket, he only has 1 option, and that's to go a bit wider. And of course, given that he's already in position to hit the cut shot, he flays it through there as well. So he sets himself up to hit the ball square and denies himself. He doesn't ever try to kind of get back in line, back and across, and bang it back down through mid-on, because if he did that, he'd get himself into massive trouble. So all of these things are a trade-off.
His eye is so good, though, that when you do throw it outside the eye line, he can still throw his hands at it, and the head is still enough to be able to make contact.
That's the only orthodox thing that he does, really, is he just keeps his head very still.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the hand-eye coordination then flows from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing player.
Joe, Pat Cummins had an amazing day. Basically, everything he did turned to gold, and he admitted himself before the tournament that he was still working out his own role in ODI cricket. And you said earlier that he'd only captained twice. I mean, first the toss and then his spell. Obviously, Head was the player of the match, but Cummins was almost as important as Head was.
I thought he bowled magnificently. He had such a good back end of the tournament, because even 3 or 4 games in, I remember us talking about, his does he actually know how he wants to bowl in 50 over cricket? Has he done it enough? What is his role in that side? It wasn't entirely clear. Then we had the captaincy question on top of that. I think you even talked about dropping in for Sean Abbott at some stage. Yes,
I asked the question.
Yeah, you asked the question, and I think we probably all said no. But no, he really came into his own. He's such a good bowler. There is obviously no reason why he shouldn't be brilliant in all formats. And today he was great. The conditions obviously suited that pace triumvirate. Mitchell Starc was absolutely bang on it again after. I think there was a bit of controversy when he was rested for the Bangladesh game, and it looked at that time like he needed a game to take some wickets to get a bit of confidence back, to get his rhythm. But actually, they obviously made the call that he needed a bit of a breather, and after that, he's just been sensational in the semis and final, which I guess would have been another call from Cummins. Probably he got pretty much everything right for the last 2/3 of the tournament going into the final.
It's that three again: Starc, Hazlewood, Cummins. I've just had a look here. 7 for 149 from their 30 overs.
So I was going to ask this actually. So a lot of people before the final, in the preview pieces, etc., were talking about Australia's knack of getting through tournaments after the final. So a lot of people saying that, it's just inbuilt in them. How much of it is just they have those three? Like if you have those three for a decade, you're going to win a lot of matches even when you're not batting very well. They cause problems on any surface against any batting lineup, and
they're also constantly there, the three of them together.
Yeah.
Right? It seems like whenever there's a big Australian game, they're all fit, they're all firing, they're all completely together, and they always raise their game in the big moments. Starc has had a very uneven tournament, and yet you absolutely know that you knew that he would turn up in the semi, and you knew that he'd turn up today. Same with Hazlewood. Just going on Cummins as well, brought Maxwell in early on, right? They'd got off to a bit of a flyer. Gill had holed out. Starc had gone for a few, brought Maxwell in before his main spinner, before himself. And Travis Head's dream day began with that catch. That is an all-timer. It's a stunning catch. The ground that he covered in that second and a half as Rowett skewed one up in the air. That was an outrageous catch, I think.
Especially from a bloke who had a broken hand a few weeks ago as well. I think that's fascinating. Sorry, we keep going back to Travis Head, but I think that's probably fair enough given the day. I mean, you'd have had hand injuries as a batter.
I didn't actually.
Did you not?
No.
All right,
it would have been more. I wouldn't have been able to have got there, to be fair. But the hands would have been fine.
I just find it amazing that he's been able to. I mean, he must be basically fine. You can't play that innings unless you're feeling fine.
No, I'm sure there was no issue with it, and they must have medically known that there was a good chance that he would be absolutely fine. With those sort of hand injuries, particularly as a batter, it all depends on which pressure point on the hand is in contact with the bat handle as to whether you're fit enough to play. But I was just going back to thinking about what you guys were saying about Cummins, and once he decided that middle overs was his thing. And once he decided that he was going to use the middle of the pitch a damn sight more and not go, the white ball, as we know, you got 10 overs maybe even with the 2 white balls of sort of lateral movement. Once he decided he was going to go in and kind of attack between the belly button and the neck, he then becomes he does what Liam Plunkett did for England's successful teams.
Very similar World Cup final spell.
Very, very similar.
And I saw the Cummins had the highest percentage of slower balls of any seamer in the tournament, which again, Plunkett would have
slower
done a similar
balls into
thing.
the pitch and hard length, but even sort of further back than that. And of course the wicket at Kohli, because Kohli at the time, listen, the first innings was very, very difficult for India because the pitch was not very good. The pitch was too tired, too worn, not enough grass on it, didn't have enough pace, and it was very, very two-paced. So Kohli comes out and plays a runnable 50, all in seat. Don't think did he get a boundary? Did
he hit 3 in a row? Early doors. Basically, yeah.
Right. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, well, and this was always going to be a big if Australia had read the conditions or the dew hadn't come for whatever reason, then 280 in that stadium against that bowling attack was going to be one heck of a challenge. It really was. But the fact of the matter was that Australia at every turn kept taking wickets. Cummins used 4 or 5 bowlers in that period outside the power play, in order not only just to get through a few, but also to try and figure out which guys are going to be the most successful in this period of time. Didn't panic when the partnership between Rahul and Kohli got together, and then broke the partnership himself by knocking over Kohli, who had made it. It was the only batter on the Indian team who made it look like it was something you could bat on. And that was huge, massive moment.
It was an amazing passage of play. So there's a 9-over spell where Cummins made 8 bowling changes, and if you're comparing the two sides, India can't do that with the only having 5 bowling options. Whereas Australia, you saw Mitch Marsh doing his Colin de Grandhomme impersonation, bowling stump to stump, medium pace with the keeper up. Travis Head bowled a couple of two overs that went for 5, I think. Rewinding to the very beginning, Phil, very bold decision at the toss that paid off big time, opting to bowl first. It was a decision that a lot of people went quite hard on when Cummins made it.
I missed the first few overs Sunday morning.
It's the World Cup final, Phil.
Yeah, but I saw my mum last night, and she enjoyed.
She's heavy, isn't she?
She enjoys a dram. Yeah, you've met her. Yeah. So I missed the first few overs, turned it on about 9 o'clock. So I missed the first 20 minutes, half hour, and thought, oh, all right, India won the toss. Yeah, fair enough. And then I saw that Australia had. I was genuinely surprised, and I thought, okay, well, that's audacious. Hope it works out for you, mate. Then you told me that Rohit would have batted for sure. So that then further sort of accentuates how cheeky the decision was, or how audacious it was, and also eliminates any question of the rub of the green having gone against India at all. There can be no complaints.
Because they would have done the same.
Because they'd have done the same. So they got what they wanted, and Australia dared to get what they wanted as well. It was a huge risk. And at 60 for 1 in 7 overs, perhaps he might have been thinking, have I made the right call here? Because as Mark says, it didn't feel like a 300 track, 270, 280. But that middle period was a mad period of cricket. From, I think, overs 12 to 40, there was hardly any boundaries at all.
So 11 to 40, there were 2 boundaries. 2
boundaries in 29 overs. There were 30 overs. Cummins bowled 10 for, didn't go for a 4. Zampa bowled 10 for, went for 1-4. So 1-4 in 20 overs between your third and fourth bowlers.
But it still felt at that moment that India could get a good total. It was it was actually Stark's absolute jaffer to get rid of Rahul. That was a huge liver at a huge moment when it looked like India were about to explode, and then they had to go back into their shell again because they've got this long tail that we've talked about. And it hasn't really worked for Suryakumar Yadav. He's obviously got all the shots, but it doesn't look like he feels that comfortable in 50-over cricket, how to kind of marshal the innings. And ended up being a bit shotless, which is bizarre to think for a player who has got probably more shots than anyone in the world. But it looked like he didn't know when to go and ended up not going. And then there was the ridiculous scenario where Kuldeep ended up facing far more balls than he did, took a single off the final ball of the over.
That was bizarre.
And that's got to fall on Yadav, really, to say we're not going to take that single.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the World Cup of predominantly test players having very good tours, especially with the bat. Going back to the toss, Butch, I was looking at the numbers yesterday. I was sort of intrigued as to what the right call will be at the toss. And you said that Australia did their preparation to the nth degree. And I thought this sort of summed it up, actually, in that the 4 games at the Modi Stadium before this game, 3 of them had been won by the side that chased. The other one was England failing to chase 280 against Australia when England weren't really scoring many runs. And Australia actually bowled second at the Modi Stadium 2 weeks ago. So they knew when they batted that there was reverse swing that you probably won't get in the second innings. And they know that dew there comes into it more than at other grounds. So it was a very bold decision. It sort of made me think that throughout the competition, Australia haven't been able to implement whatever their plan A is at many stages because they've had the injuries, they've had loss of form to several key players. So they've always been reacting to what's in front of them. And today was just another example of that. Whereas India, they lost the toss, obviously, but also they were going to bat first. They were going to do what plan A was almost regardless of conditions, whereas Australia were very, very flexible and did something in the field they hadn't really done before. Yeah.
I still think it's a hell of a bold call because all of those things rely entirely upon you doing them well. Right, like I say, if they hadn't, they fielded so well. in the first, in the power play. Obviously the head catch, but you got Warner and Labuschagne, not allowing anything to go through. The ground fielding was absolutely epic. The support for the bowlers was great. The bowlers bowled incredibly well, and so therefore, India could have made 270 batting first.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there was 76 for one after 9.3 overs before Head takes that catch to get Rowett. I mean, at that point, that still could have been a disastrous call from Cummins. If India go and rack up 320,
there was no guarantee whatsoever that doing what they did was going to result in the heavy win that they ended up taking. However, if they played to their absolute ability, then it was on the cards, and they did. So toss aside and conditions and the way that they perhaps changed a little bit in the second half aside, they still had to do the job unbelievably well, and there was not a single person in the Australian team who didn't have, particularly in the field with the ball, who didn't have the close to a perfect day.
Phil, Australia weren't very good in the opening two games. You said earlier Cummins only captained twice in ODIs before the World Cup. What do you think
before coming to India, there's the stat.
Yes,
he captained in the ODI series against India before the World Cup, but before arriving in the country.
Okay, so two games before arriving in India. What do you think Australia got right after those two losses? What do you think changed for them at that point?
Certainly, landing on the idea of having a tough old world middle order at 4 and 5. To allow the fantasy players in the top 3 and Maxwell, the freak, behind them. That ended up, on those pitches, as the tournament rolled on, that ended up being a really good, balanced model, I think. And they also deserve credit for going with Inglis early doors when Carey began. Inglis is, 30 odd or whatever it was in the semi-final. Massive knock, really. Context of that game. Took 5 catches today. I mean, you'd have been disappointed to have dropped any, but still, that worked out really well for them. Cummins has never been renowned necessarily as a sort of visionary captain. He's more a kind of pragmatic leader from the front, inspirational player. Him and his brains trust, McDonald's had a really good tournament, right? They've just got it right. They've got the right people in the right places for the right conditions. And there's an identity to the team towards the back end that wasn't really there at the start. Don't want to mention Travis Head again, but clearly it did hinge on him, right? To a large degree, it hinged on him. Freed up Marsh, not a natural opener, to go in there and have a dart 3. Just all made sense.
Yeah.
Also, just Zampa as well, who had taken a bit of a hammering leading into the World Cup, having had stunningly good form prior to that. I was just looking up his stats a long time ago now, isn't it? 0 for 53 against India in the opener, and then 1 for 70 against South Africa. And I think it was Finch or Watson saying on commentary later in the tournament that Zampa just wasn't bowling like he had been previously, and maybe as a result of being battered by that South African batting lineup. And then after that, he takes 3 4-fers in a row, then a 3-fer, then a 3-fer. To have those 3 seamers that we've talked about, plus Zampa, that's going to go a long way to getting you to a World Cup final. And he actually had, a relatively quiet game today based on the rest of his tournament. But they've got a really, really well-balanced bowling lineup.
There is also something indefinable about playing for Australia, right? 6 times. It doesn't happen by accident. They don't turn up to play, they turn up to win, and they often find a way of doing it. If they win the T20 thing in the summer, then they hold the Triple Crown, of all 3. And when you consider how difficult it is across the formats, they also won the last but one T20 tournament, not given a sniff, went and won it with their test team. Thanks very much. There's something about that shirt.
Especially
and look, genuinely, long may it fucking rain. I mean that. The international cricket needs Australia to be like that.
Why?
They don't have
because they are such a part of the fabric of it.
They don't have an enormous
the soul of it.
In comparison with say English cricket and with Indian cricket, I suppose they don't have a massive player pool either, which is why you find them with largely the players through the formats are the same guys. Best players are the best players, right? And if you go into these things, particularly tournaments, I think with the attitude that it's not necessarily about sort of any sort of ideology in the way you play. It's about winning games. I mean, we've had 2 knockout matches. Australia won them both. They won the South Africa game in scrappy fashion, but got it done and have blitzed this team here. That's kind of all that it's about. In your bilateral series, when you're looking to try and attract people and keep people's attention to the format or whatever, maybe it is about going out there and playing in a certain way in order to catch eyeballs. But when it comes to tournaments, the only thing that matters is a trophy.
Yeah.
Ask the Indian fans.
Yeah. I say this without comment, but it's now what? Well, 1996 was the last time a men's team outside of the Big Three won the World Cup. So that speaks of the imbalance in the game, right? We perhaps maybe talk about that later in the week when the dust has settled on it. For now, it's rightly a celebration of a brilliant performance. But when you do move forward in this format, if we're agreed as a game that we want to protect it, still want to nurture it, then in an ideal world there is a greater pool of potential winners than we are seeing, right? And India and Australia have been notably far ahead. South Africa have overperformed and played really well, but the gap is vast.
To be fair, since 1996, it has just basically been Australia, but 2.
Sure.
Also, we know that if you host these
your
tournaments,
point.
you've got a really good chance of winning them, and they often do get the most opportunities to host these tournaments as well.
All of that is fair.
Yeah.
All of that is fair.
Well, India become the first side since West Indies in 2007 to not win a home men's World Cup. Well, that's a good place to end part 1. In part 2, we'll talk more about India. Bob asks, can you do the first 5 minutes of the show in pure silence? It'd be fitting. I can't remember a side dominating a tournament like they have to end up not winning it. But we did a team of the tournament for the website and we had 6 Indian players in it. You'd mentioned just there about ideologies. India, I thought it was interesting that they went as hard for as long at the very start, given the potentially vulnerable lower middle order. Rohit Sharma plays a shot having hit 10 runs off 2 balls against Glenn Maxwell when India are going at 8s, and 2 overs later they're 3 down and they take a long time to recover. Did you think they could have afforded to be a bit more flexible today rather than just doing exactly what they had done in previous games on very different pitches?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, in the lead up to the final, we'd praise Rohit for setting the tone and for setting the tempo for the rest of the order. So it'd be a bit harsh to kind of to pick him out for that. Again, potentially, I don't know. Potentially, they hadn't quite read the situation or the conditions quite as well as Australia did. And when 280 was probably a really, really good score, they went shooting for the moon, which can hurt you a little bit. The interesting thing for me is there's been a lot of chat about pitches and all this kind of stuff, is that when you have a team as good as India are, with bat and ball, that the flatter and sort of more even the surfaces, the better they are. You kind of, if you get hoisted by your own petard a little bit if the conditions level things out, or at least there's an imbalance between first innings and second innings in conditions. And it hasn't really bitten them on the backside up until today. But I'd love to watch. It'd be wonderful to watch the sort of like India's batters, people like Rohit and Virat and Gill and Kumar and stuff, going out there and playing on something where the ball comes on and they can show us how good they are. But that doesn't happen very often. And particularly the bigger the game, the more that and Ahmedabad, the surfaces have been pretty consistent throughout the whole thing, and there's no hint that there was any sort of pressure put on this occasion around this surface. But my goodness me, would they, having been asked to bat first, they'd have preferred the ball to have been coming on a bit better than they did in this one, and given their stroke players a chance to go out and do what they can do. But that's the situation they found themselves in. And of course, having played so damn well and been so dominant throughout the rest of the tournament, they're people like Surya Kumar Yadav and the lower order have had nothing to do. So you come in the biggest tournament against an unbelievably good bowling attack in Australia, and you're kind of like a little bit scrabbling around for how you're going to make your runs. And that's basically what happened. Bowling wise, they've always got a chance, right? You felt at 3 down that they had a massive chance. Australia, to their absolute credit, did the smart thing, switched the brains on and just went, okay, we repel for a little while longer. We wait for the dew to take a bit more of an effect. We don't get 5 down before that happens, and we win the game. And that's what they did.
Joe mentioned it earlier, but there's off the wicket of Iyer, who fell in the 11th over. India scored 2 boundaries in the next 30 overs, effectively, and you had this very long partnership between Rahul and Kohli, where they didn't really take a risk for 2 hours. What did you make of that passage of play, and do you think they could have afforded more risk, or is it that was the way they had to play given what was to come?
I think it's the latter, really. And at the time, I thought they were doing a good job. I thought it was a holding pattern for sure, and they would have wanted to hit a few more boundaries, but the run rate hadn't completely stalled. They were turning over the strike reasonably well. It wasn't like it was maiden after maiden or anything like that, and it was all going to be what can their middle to lower order do in the last 10 overs, particularly if they lost a couple of wickets, which they did. And that was always the weakness in the Indian side. We just weren't sure if it would ever be visible, because they might manage to win the tournament without it actually being a problem, but it was for them today. Looking at their squad, I don't think there's a different way they could have balanced their side, really. I wouldn't go down that route. Obviously, Pandya not being there makes things difficult, but it had gone all right for them up until this point. So no, I don't think that. I think that partnership, at the time when Rahul walked off, I think one of the commentators said, we don't know yet if that's a match-winning innings or not. And it felt like it, it could be. If it was going to be a similar game to 2019 final, where it was, 2 scrappy innings, then that could have been a pivotal innings. As it was, the conditions were so different in the second innings. It wasn't the same kind of match. And Australia played it to a T.
Phil, how much of a loss was Hardik Pandya for this India team?
Well, probably quite significant. Because Yadav, first, he didn't get much of a go, but also looked quite self-conscious and out of rhythm and nick when he did. And today's innings was a real struggle for him. Australia, again, tactically brilliant, just slower balls into the pitch with basically a backstop and a very, very fine leg. Brilliant. Didn't really know where to go. Gloved it. Job done. The other thing about Pandya, he's the cockiest cricketer I've ever seen in my whole life. He absolutely loves it. He turned up for the derby, right, against Pakistan, and just announced, I'm just going to bowl faster than I've ever bowled before, folks. And lo and behold...
And sort of did.
And did. And then, because cricket's the cruelest of them all, obviously got injured a day or two later. But he was a miss, I think. He was a miss for the sort of the scale of the team, right? And the shimmer of the team. It's amazing how quickly it turned around, right? Just going back to the Sharma thing, and this is not a criticism of him because he set the tone and he's an icon, but there will be a lot of people who will be cranky in India at the moment thinking, just hold back a moment. You are ahead of the game. So much of 50 over cricket is about winning the first 10 overs. You've won them, hands down, and especially now we know what the pitch was like.
It wasn't it was never going to be a 350 pitch.
But then, it's cruel. He's played beautifully, 47, 30-odd balls. He's hit 7 of them to the boundary. So, my word, it'd be churlish to criticise him. But when you look at the moments, that was the key moment in their innings. If he had milked Maxwell, they are still ahead of the game. And then you set up that middle order. But as it was, suddenly you're 80 for 3. And then it was a rebuild job. It was tentative and timid. And then Yadav, they knew that he was there and he'd made 3 runs in 3 innings or whatever it was. And he's never quite convinced for some weird reason in 50 over cricket anyway. Suddenly it felt a little bit shaky. And I think if Pandya had been in there with his shoulders and his cockiness, then perhaps they'd have felt a little bit more relaxed about living a little in those middle overs. As it was very, very tentative.
I think
all those weeks ago, Yaz, you picked him out as your player of the tournament, didn't you, Pandya?
Yeah, and he played two games in the end.
But that's how important we felt, or you particularly felt he was at the start of this thing.
Well, I was talking to a couple of our colleagues in India, and was sort of saying that maybe we were sort of underplaying how much of a miss he was, because India were just more vulnerable in both disciplines without him in the side. So with the bat, he's a more adaptable number 6 than Surya Kumar is. I mean, to the extent that Yadav got demoted below Jadeja today. And then with the ball, if anyone is not 100% on it, again, they don't have anywhere to go. I mean, Siraj had a not particularly good day in the semi-final.
But,
But
he didn't get given the new ball, did he? I mean, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
They took away his main weapon in the first place, and then when he came back in, he had nothing to go to. He didn't have any movement to work with. Obviously, clearly, he was unbelievably important. But India had played so fantastically well without him. It kind of disguised the hole that he had left. And you're right. You know, the Rohit dismissal, the delivery that got rid of KL Rahul, just as they just manoeuvred, they got themselves to a position where, okay, they might now be able to start being a little bit freer. And you still thought that, you know, with 10, 12 overs to go, that if they put another 60 or 70, maybe even 80 to 90 on the back of that score, that they'd be in really fantastic shape. And then Stark comes in and knocks over KL with an absolute dream delivery from around the wicket. Look, India will think to themselves that they've played brilliant cricket in the tournament, and they came up against a side on the day that were better than them, which is going to happen. You know, it's a World Cup final. You've got the two best teams in the world. I said in the last pod that the only team I felt that could beat them would be Australia. And not only did Australia play the perfect game, but they also got everything else right as well in terms of how they were tactically going to go about it.
I guess the warning sign was the England game. You know, the only other occasion really where they lost 3 early wickets, they only got to 230 odd, and it was sort of England's struggles with the bat at the time. I guess meant that we sort of glossed over that to a degree. Joe, what do you think comes next for India? Because for Australia, it's all sort of...
Haven't they got a T20 series in about a week?
Yes.
Technically there.
Technically, yeah. I mean, for Australia, this sort of signs off this generation of players on a high note. Obviously, there's still more to come. But for India, for this group of players to not won a white ball tournament since 2011 is extraordinary.
Yeah, and there's some big decisions to be made. I envisaged India winning this tournament. Rohit Sharma saying... that's my lot. What a way to go. But now, do you want to hang around for the next one? That feels like a bit of a stretch, but there is a Champions Trophy you could win before that. Obviously, you've got a T20 World Cup. I think the T20 World Cup's quite interestingly placed because it delays a lot of these decisions. I think there will be a lot of retirements around now in the next couple of months, but a lot of players, I think, instead will see how the T20 World Cup shapes up and then make that call. I mean, the one thing you know with India is there are so many good players. I mean, and it's just which ones you go for. And it as an outside observer, obviously watching Rohit is one of the kind of great pleasures, but there's also an excitement about what comes next. And you know, these are players that you see a bit of in the IPL and you hear these names, but you don't know if they're going to be the next superstar. So there's no concerns there. But you know, the wait goes on, and every time they get, however good they are in a tournament, they're not going to be better in a tournament than they were in this one when they get to the next final. So there'll always be that question. Well, they didn't win the last one. Are they going to win this one? And it will nag away. You know, it certainly will nag away at the fans when you see, you know, 120,000 as Ravi said, maybe more like 90. I think was the official attendance. There is absolute devastation there because everyone thought, well, this is the time when we're going to win it.
And it felt like they were at such a sweet spot as a side because they had players at different levels, different phases of their careers that was quite complementary. You know, part of, I said what makes Australia so good is that trio of fast bowlers. India, Shami's 33, Bumrah turns 30 in a couple of weeks' time. Jadeja's 35. Ashwin, I know he didn't play much in the tournament, but he's late 30s as well. The makeup of that Indian side after this T20 World Cup early next year is going to look very different quite soon.
Rohit Sharma is 3 months shy of his 37th birthday. And will now, you can't imagine him being the captain of that side in 4 years' time, obviously. You'd be possibly a bit surprised if he can get up for the T20 tournament next summer, but perhaps he will feel that his career, adorned as it has this era, probably more beautifully than any other player, and he is in possession of some incredible numbers and feats. He's the greatest batter in World Cup history, statistically, from what we saw, the number of hundreds that he's made in World Cups. He made 3 doubles. He averages 47 in test matches, but he's only played 52 and he's almost 37. That's a devastating story in itself. He didn't play for 10 years, madly. And he's never won anything in an Indian shirt. Is that correct?
He might have won a Champions Trophy at some point.
He might have won the 2013 Champions Trophy here.
Yeah.
Okay, perhaps he won that. But he's not won any of the big ones. He's been there so close to it so much. And there will always be this sense that perhaps he's the greatest of the players to not win anything really, truly, powerfully significant. I mean, others will say, well, he won 5 IPLs, and that would be a fair riposte to that. But some players are great players in spite of the medals that they have in their drawer at home. And some players are great players because of what they've won. And Rohit, as befits his slightly poetic air, I'm afraid fits into the former category.
Well, I feel very similarly about Bumrah. Having Bumrah in your side gives you such an advantage in World Cups. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago. He's the standout seamer fast bowler of his generation. And as soon as his powers wane, being competitive on the global stage, however good your next crop of young batting stars is, just makes it so much harder to win these tournaments.
Yeah, sure does. I mean, once we get to 3 or 4 days hence from this final, we'll probably be thinking, how the heck have they not won it? But that, again, that's knockout cricket, I suppose. But my God, with the riches at their disposal, to not win it this time round just feels like, the biggest of missed opportunities. And Phil's quite right to say it, that, a lot of these guys won't appear in another one. And the experience and the quality has been hard won. All of that doesn't come together over the space of a couple of years of, bedding in rookies to a new team. That's a team at the absolute peak of their powers. And a lot of them won't see another one. So it's a big shame for those guys personally. And also, I suppose it's also a mark of how incredible an achievement that is for Australia to win it there as well.
Absolutely.
Stuart Broad has more test runs than Rohit Sharma.
Really?
Just looked at it.
What?
No, he doesn't.
I was going to say that.
He has 5 runs fewer. No, 15 runs fewer. So Rohit Sharma scored 15 more runs than Stuart Broad in Test cricket.
What a way to end our World Cup Daily podcast.
Before we go, seeing as we've reached the end of this thing, a little toast to you, Yaz. Stunning effort over 6.5 weeks.
Well played, Yazeen.
We've obviously just swanned in here and there, but
quality.
You've done the dead rubbers, the crushing one-siders, and
all
also,
of England's games.
And also to Dan, unsung hero.
I was going to say, I
editor,
think
producer,
player of the tournament from here by a mile is our video editor, Dan Senior, who has put together every single one of these. That is a Herculean effort. And also, I guess, thank you, our listeners, as well, for sticking with us, especially through those
if
dark
you're still
days
there, thank you very much.
In the first half of the tournament. What an effort that has been. We'll be back tomorrow, actually, for our weekly show. But we'll be going to the pub to enjoy ourselves after this. This episode of the Wisden Cricket World Cup Daily Podcast has been powered by Scene. Once again, Scene are our video partners on wisden.com, helping us to deliver a more engaging and immersive viewing experience across mobile, tablet and desktop. Head to the link in our description to find out more.